I looked down at the 200-pound pile of battered meat that at one point had been Mark Miller, laying across my boots, looking like so much tenderized meat. His left eye was sitting in a shattered socket. The bruised flesh of his ocular orbit was puffed up around it, painted with interesting shades of blue and purple. The bruised skin forced the left eye closed. The right eye, however, was open for business and staring right up at me. I made eye contact with a dead man. The unoccupied window to Mark's soul sent a shiver up my spine with the unnerving magic that only a dead eye staring back at you can manage to muster. Somebody once told me that staring into a dead man's eyes was akin to staring into the abyss and finding the great nothingness staring back at you. I'll be honest, I'm still not actually sure what it's supposed to mean. But I'll admit it sounds cool. I pulled my eyes away from Mark and looked up at the screeching shitbird above us. Some bitch was still there, flown on a thermal or something, and glaring down at us. He was making all manner of threatening bird noises, and trust me, those words do not properly convey the pucker factor of the situation. He seemed to be trying to get across to us that we weren't in charge of this particular situation. He was the captain now. I looked over at my comrades in arms, mostly trying to get a notion of what we were supposed to do next. I noticed for the first time that night that Dollywall had one of those fancy Italian double-barrel 1911s clutched in his massive backwards hand. I vaguely remember thinking, hey, he gets a stupid gun, why don't I? Which was a reference to Senior Deputy Gruck making me switch out my 45-70 government revolver to something more practical earlier in the evening. I also remember thinking, I wonder if he'd actually try that idiotic thing out. Dollywall had the twin .45 caliber bores of the pistol brought to bear on the creature. The overly serious look in his face said that he wanted to use the weapon. The tip of his tongue playing along his thin black lips in anticipation, as if in deep concentration. I could tell he was getting tunnel vision, focusing on the threat right above him. Hey, I'm not judging. It's easy to do. Outside of that, though, he looked as cool as an unpickled cucumber. I looked around the clearing. I saw a vague movement in the pitch black of the trees surrounding us at the edges of the pasture. I heard excited whispering crawling our way across the breeze. Didn't know if it was the creatures in the trees or just the night sky itself.
The master comes!
The shitbird hovering above us screeched again. It was less slightly intimidating this time, without the corpse falling out of the sky. But nevertheless, whether or without a fallen corpse, it was still a real pants shitter. Especially since the feathered asshole above us had buddies, sitting in the trees who were lending their cheerful support to his every proclamation. Upon the creature's further proclamation of the boss's impending arrival, the trees exploded in nails on chalkboards, screeches of approval, and dead white eyes blazed with furious joy. I could see them without squinting from 100 yards off in the dead of night. I noticed that going to be the multiple twin points of lights, their numbers seemed to have tripled. Fuckers were legion. Gruck had her massive .458 SOCOM AR pistol at the ready. Not quite aimed at the shitbird, but not far from it either. She did that weird eye thing orcs do. The one where they aim one eyeball in one direction, look elsewhere with the other. Now, I'm not gonna lie, no matter how many times I see her do the eye thing, that shit still gives me the heebies, and this time was no different. She keeps one eye glued on the shitbird above us. The other eye scanned our environs, looking for oncoming threats. She looked all business, ready to roll with whatever the night was gonna throw our way. I realized I was the only one with his pistol still in leather, so I rectified that. I brought the Glock 40 up and scanned as best as I could for my spot in the dirt. Once I ascertained we wouldn't be attacked in the next 4 seconds, I decided that now was probably a good time to get to my feet. Pain shot through my side. Something that felt an awful lot like a broken rib was telling me to take it easy for a minute. But I wasn't in any position to pay its suggestion any mind. My vision burst with unexpected stars and static as I tried to get my legs out from under Mr. Miller's mortal coil. My hand shot to my side where the pain was radiating from. The slight pressure hurt like hell. Yep, broken rib. Fuck me, right? I felt the pain sweat break out across my forehead, instantly chilled by the cold night air. I helped push my internal anxiety meter up a notch. I had to pause and take a breath in order to try and catch my bearings. I guess what was left of Mark Miller had left a bit of a hurting on me when he fell out of the sky. I imagined it was when one of his big-footed feet had tagged me in the chest, when he'd been dropped on me by the shitbird. Which, had he been alive, he probably would have found a real gutbuster of a giggler. Given the history between the sheriff's department and the Millers, we weren't exactly on affable terms.
You okay, Calm?
Grug asked after glancing down at me, using my name for the first time in what felt like forever. There was a spot of concern in her voice. She was still scanning around us, but she had taken a moment to make sure she was still in a fight. She was a good leader. "What's the move, boss?" I said in a quiet, paint-racked tone of voice, ignoring her question but letting her know I was still switched on. I'd lick my wounds later. Were this the movies, we would have mowed that shitbird down to call it a day. However, if we had tried that in real life, the shitbirds in the trees would have most likely swarmed us and torn a whole lot of us apart on the spot. So that was a non-starter. We would have to skip the bravado and do like my dad always said. Don't go looking for a fight, boy. And I definitely plan to honor my father's wishes on that one. But I would be remiss not to mention the second part of that axiom was, but if one happens to find you, you damn sure finish it. Texas dads have been saying that for generations, and it's generally sound advice. But in a fight with this many shitbirds, well, we might not be the ones doing the finishing of said Donnybrook. First thing was first, though. I was always going to have to bite through the pain and shove the body off my legs. Pain fled through my side as I pulled one of my feet from under Mark. It took me a bit longer than it should have, as I tried to baby my injury. I got the foot free and used it to shove the dead man off my other leg, which in and of itself was a painful process. I pushed myself slowly, gingerly to my feet. I took the opportunity to be delicate with myself, since I had no idea if I would be afforded such an opportunity again that night. I gotta tell you, if anyone ever offers to break one of your ribs, pass that shit up. I don't care if they offer to do it for free. No matter how delicate I was, though, it still hurt like a son of a gun. I still count myself lucky. I was just hurt. I'd been hurt before. I knew hurt well. Hurt is a game changer, but it's not a game killer. It's death that'll shit all over your parade.
Well, the smart money says we should leave. There's too many of them,
Grug said in a low and steady tone.
So let's play like we're smarter than we look, and ease on down the driveway to the cars. Call for backup and try to avoid a fight whilst we're outnumbered. Let's do this nice and easy, gentlemen.
Lead on, a fearless leader, Dolly once said, his voice almost a cheerful purr. He spared a glance over to me, concern on his face. He gave me a nod, which I returned. Let him know I was good for the moment. The big man turned its attention back to the hovering shitbird above us. He must have twigged what was up with my rib, most likely on account of the way I was cradling my side, because he said, "Come, you aren't going to let something so minor as a broken rib put a dour look on your usually cheerful face, are you?" His voice put me in mind of the English phrase, cheerfulness in the face of the enemy. Basically, British military officers were meant to deal with not only the enemy, but adversity as well, in a cheerful manner, complete with good humor and dry sarcasm. I briefly wondered if he ever found himself in the service of the Queen. "Wouldn't fucking dream of it, bud," I said with a little bit of wince in my voice. I was trying, and failing, to maintain an ire of badass shit kicker. He gave me a feline smile and shot me a backwards thumbs up. I noticed he had that awkward way of doing it that Brits always seem to have. He looked back up at the shitbird above us. His face took on a look that matched his cheerful tone of voice from earlier. The Rakshassan sheriff's deputy looked like he was ready to do a mag dump into the creature and tear its beak off with his bare hands. Pause? Whatever. And damn it, he would do it with a cheerful disposition in his heart, by God. "Let's go," Grug rumbled from ahead of us. We had to move down the driveway slowly. I was the asshole slowing us up. I don't know if you've ever broken a rib, but I'm here to tell you it will, in fact, put a hitch in your giddy-up. Gruck and Dollywall weren't going to leave me behind either, so they moved at a slower pace. The lone Valkyrie followed us from above, flying lazy circles over us, keeping up its mantra the whole time. It kept on telling us that the master was coming and all that shit. Some bitch was starting to get on my second to last goddamn nerve. The fact that every time he made his proclamation the trees would erupt with screeching squawks of approval wasn't helping my agitation either.
"So,
Gruk said in a nonchalant voice that was just a touch out of place in the face of our current unspoken terror, such as it was.
Who do you think this master feller is? Think he might be a mutual acquaintance?
I looked over at the big orc. She was doing that orc thing. Not the eye thing, the other orc thing. Orcs got a lot of things. The one where they act completely neutral, nonplussed even in the face of overwhelming odds. I think it's some sort of cultural thing. If something scares you, better pretend like it ain't shit. Nothing to be concerned about. It will probably go away on its own when it sees how unconcerned you are. The master hombre could pop himself into existence right in front of us, and Senior Deputy Lavonda Gruk would probably turn her nose up at him and tiredly ask something along the lines of, "Can I help you, sir?" with all the disdainful wariness of a retail employee on any given Black Friday. It was one of the things I normally loved about old Mama Bear. That night, however, I found it grating, agitating even. I mean, it made sense for her. Not only was she an orc, but a vampire as well. Asking if the shitbirds could even kill her was a fair question to ask. I'm sure they could put the hurting on her, of course. Maybe even lay her up for a couple of days, but it was up in the air as to whether they could actually send her on a long walk. I mean, shit. Some years back when Lavonda Gruk was my TO, we responded to a 1065 call, or armed robbery for those of you who don't speak the particular dialect of 10 code. It was on the Skelly gas station out in I-10. The person doing the robbering was a rock elf teenager, or elf equivalent of a teenager at least, which is around 300 years old. I won't name the kid here, on account of his mama is still real embarrassed about the whole thing. Not to mention that elf names are a pain in the ass to spell. He was young, as elves go, but he was more than old enough to know better. When we got in there, we noticed that he had a blasting stave with stylized Arctic runes on it. It looked like a cheap one, too, built by one of those fly-by-night artificers who care more about material gain than they do customer satisfaction. I mean, shit, the runes on that thing weren't even proper carvings. Shit was just made out of plastic. It was just as likely to explode in the user's hand as it was to fire off in the direction it was aimed. A Saturday night special if there ever was one. Kid would have been better off and safer too if he had splurged on a high-point yeet cannon. He was screaming at the terrified shellycoat behind the counter, portly gal in a red polo shirt, the Skelly Oil logo over her heart. Her name was Juanita. Now, I like Juanita. I do. She's the sweetest of sweethearts. But she is hands down the most timid creature the great creator ever put on this green earth. Now, she looked off-putting. Scary even, if you don't know the score. But if someone slammed the door too loud, she would jump right out of her skin. She had her hands held straight up over her head, which barely cleared the counter, and her big gray eyes couldn't get any wider. The elf holding the blaster was obviously not sober. Gone off on some cheap honey wine and cheaper Mexican pipe weed, which I usually find to have more of a calming effect myself, but, anyway, different strokes of different folks, I guess. So this kid is ranting about how far his people have fallen, how it isn't right, and all kind of bullshit. How they be ruling the lands of man, like they used to. Because of course he was. Why wouldn't he be an elven supremacist, as well as an asshole? Most of that shit is patently false, by the way. Besides, of which I don't see how menacing an elderly shellycoat with a magic arm would have an effect on any of that. You sit with an old-timers down at the Mason Lodge, and not one of them can remember the time when elves ruled the lands of man, or any other such nonsense. They got long memories. Best I can tell is, it's something elves tell their kids to keep them proud. Sometimes those kids take it too far. Like the fine, upstanding example of elvish trailer trash standing with his back to us. Sometimes they take it even further. There's a federal elven supremacist unit, FISU, for a reason after all. So anyway, Gruk tells him to drop the blaster. Watching the security tapes later, you could tell that we startled the fuck out of him. He was so toasted he probably didn't even know where he was, let alone even register that we had gotten within 15 feet of him without setting him off. He spun around and let fly the magic wand. That sort of magic blast probably took a year off his natural lifespan. It was probably flat out panic fire, not that it mattered. A blast of icy Arctic wind dropped the temperature in the room and caught Gruk square in the chest, picked her up and threw her against the wall, sending her through the shelving racks, displays, and junk food. I remember the sound her head made as it smacked into the wall. It sounded like a rotten pumpkin being thrown off a balcony at a third-floor apartment. I thought she was dead. I was sure of it. I reacted without thinking. I opened fire on the elf before he could shift his fire, ice, ouchie magic stick on me. I put my front sight post center of the elf's mass and emptied the Glock magazine into him. It'd been my turn to throw some panic fire, but I still put most of my bullets into or through him. Now, elves are hardy, I grant you, but not hardy enough to tank 10 rounds of 10mm right into the breadbasket, especially not with the custom hot boats the Bullshart County Sheriff's Department runs in their guns. I didn't even check on the elf. I put him down hard. I figured Juanita was still alive due to the weird, terrified yet somehow musical screaming she was letting off from the ball she was curled up in behind the counter. Or at least that's what I told myself. The truth was, I was worried about Gruck and not thinking about anyone else. I kicked shelving racks and broken ceiling panels off Lavonda Gruck, fully expecting to find a dead orc at my feet. My heart was in my throat. I was new, but I already had an affinity for Mama Bear. Dispatch! I remember screaming into my shoulder mic. I remember desperately trying to remember my 10 codes and just blurting out numbers. 1020! 1033! My TO is down! Shots fired! Gruck's been hit with something! I could have just used plain speak on that occasion, but Gruck was a mess, all bloodied and frostbitten. I was freaking out. Jen just told me to sit tight, help was on the way. I bent down and tried to find a pulse on the massive orc. But of course, I couldn't find one. As I was checking for a pulse on the orc, like I would on a human, which was a fucking fool's errand. My hands were shaking and I didn't know what to do. I thought Gruck was dead. I was pretty surprised when her eyes popped open and she sat bolt upright. "Where's that freaking fricker?" she roared, the closest I've ever heard her come to cursing. She hopped up and immediately started scolding me for not checking on the elf, or Juanita for that matter, before checking on her. Aside from a few bumps, bruises, and minor lacerations, she had been fine. Upon later examination of the blaster, it had been found to be what's called a mixer, a stave with more than one type of magic imbued to it. This one had Arctic Blast as its main course, with a side dish of livestock-grade sleep magic as its secondary. An odd mix if there ever was one. Probably built out of some spare parts bin. The Arctic Blast had barely phased her. Being picked up and thrown to the wall hadn't done much to her either. These were both things that would have probably killed most people who weren't an Arc. It was the sleep magic and nothing else. It was meant for God knows what type of animal. All it done to Gruck was make her nod off for a moment. That was before she was a vampire. Yep, Lavonda Gruck was built like a fucking tank. So a dust-up with a Valkyrie might have been a touch anxiety-inducing for her, but it wasn't as scary a prospect for her. Me, on the other hand, with my human physiology... Shit, you're probably human too, so you know damn well that someone with a good-sized rock and a bad-sized attitude could do to us. We got nothing metaphysical going on to hold us together when we get tore up. Now, cards on the table, I've got a few people that give enough a shit about me, what might have been able to bring me back from the edge of the abyss. But they weren't out there that night. The most I could realistically expect was to be avenged in a violently grand fashion. So her asking questions that might bring the attention of something big our way? Well, it didn't induce as much fear in her. Does it fucking matter at this particular point? I painfully spat out with much incredulousness as my busted rib would allow. As I said, it was a little testy at this point, and it showed in my voice.
Language,
she said, her voice laced with so much motherly admonishment.
And no, I suppose it won't matter if we can't get ourselves out of this little pickle.
She gestured around us with a flock of shitbirds in the trees with her AR pistol. Her voice had taken on the tone of your mom when she was trying to get you to go to your weird cousin's birthday party. The one you didn't want to go to.
But come on, I mean, aren't you just a little curious?
I thought about that. It was a noodle teaser, all right. What the hell was a flock of shitbirds out there playing reindeer games with us for? Had they cut up the Millers? Had the master done it? What was the point? After a moment of tossing around in my head, I made a grunting sound that meant it was, in fact, just a little curious. I mean, yeah, it was a valid as fuck sort of question. Do you think, Dollywad said, not turning his head towards us, continuing to scan with his double-barreled pistol, that it might not be constructive to ask our skyborn friends here? I mean, he seems to be proud of this mysterious master fella. Can't stop bandaying on about him.
The master comes!
Our airborne escort hollered down at us again, as if he knew we were talking about him and just had to kick his 2 cents in. Fucking eavesdropper. See? Deputy Dollywall said with all the chipperness he could muster. Old son can't stop going on about him. Deputy Grook seemed to mull that over as we moved. We would reach the cars soon, not that it mattered. We could get laywayed by the sons of bitches at any given moment. After all, even on a normal day, the majority of the time, safety is a comforting illusion at best.
It couldn't hurt, I suppose,
Greg said, as if they weren't discussing throwing bacon in with the green beans for Sunday supper.
And it does fall under our job description, investigating and such.
I sighed with no fair amount of exasperation, partially because as the least supernaturally inclined of our trio, I had the most fat in this particular fire. But also because of the busted lung cage rung in my chesticle region meant I was going to be a straight ass in the dust-up. And if a simple conversation with this feathered asshole and his arboreal companions went sideways, I probably meant I was going to get it square in the neck. When dealing with the supernatural, there was literally no telling what could set a being off. Hell, I once got into a spat with a minor fae priestess, because she considered the way I asked if her driver's license was valid as insulting. To this day, I have no clue what about that question set her off. Total Karen. But oh well, we gotta punch the clock and go on to our eternal reward at some point. Better to pretend we got some control over the matter, for ego's fragile sake, I suppose. Well, fuck it, I said loud enough for Tiger Man and the eternal orc at my side to hear. I am a little curious as to what in the name of buckle fuckment is going on here.
That's the spirit, potty mouth,
Lavonda said with every bit of false giddiness she could muster.
I mean, we've all got to go down the lonesome valley at some point. Let's go with no questions burdening ourselves.
Yeah, Dollywall agreed wholeheartedly. Fucking Christ, I muttered under my breath. These idiots were ready to row a canoe right across the river Styx their own damn selves. The boatmen be damned.